All right. Cody here with Creation Outdoors, and we're back. For those of you that have been paying attention to the channel, I apologize because it has been quite some time since we uploaded a video. Life just gets busy sometimes. So my family and I have been in the process of moving to a new state and starting a new job, and so it's been a pretty big time sink as of late, and so I haven't been able to do a whole lot, and I'm sorry. But that's how it goes. But here we are, actually in Iowa, which is exciting for this upcoming fall. If you know, you know. But Iowa, kind of the mecca of whitetail deer hunting, and that's where we're going to be spending a lot of the fall. I hope to get some scouting videos up soon. We've done a little bit with the family here, checking out some pieces of public land. That's been a lot of fun. But for now, we're picking up a little bit where we left off. And as season is drawing close, I want to prep my arrows in my setup for this upcoming bow season. So we just came off Total Archery Challenge, just being a relative term, of course, because it's been a little bit of time. But we have some arrow repair to do. So today I'm going to walk through how I fletch my arrows and my overall arrow setup and what I'm going to be using this fall. And hopefully you learn something, because it is actually a lot of fun to kind of get creative and mess around and tinker and fine tune your setup and really get invested into the gear that you use. So without further ado, let's get rolling. So for building your own arrows, there's a couple key pieces of equipment that you need, and I'll put the links to everything that I use in the description below, and there's a lot of different alternatives for what I'm using. But just to get started, you're going to need a fletching jig, and so I use the Bitzenburger fletching jig. It's kind of the tried and true standard that you can't really go wrong with. The thing that I like about this is that it can do 3 fletch or 4 fletch, left or right helical, or just an offset. And along with that jig, you need the clamps. And so these then dictate your offset or your helical. And so for today, we're actually going to be using a left helical. And that's based off of how my bow naturally wants to spin the arrow. And so Lancaster Archery Supply has a great video for how to determine that. Again, I'll link that in the description below. But essentially, my bow wants to spin the arrow left, and we're going to work with that natural tendency, and we're going to use a left helical fletching jig. So beyond that, you're going to need some arrows, of course, bare shaft, because we're going to be putting the fletchings on ourselves. And so I use an Easton Axis 5mm carbon arrow. I like this arrow because I think it's a good balance of weight and strength, and I like the 5mm diameter a lot. This is a 300 spine because of the amount of poundage that I'm shooting and the amount of weight that I have in the front. I actually have their brass insert in the front of this arrow, just add a little bit more front of center weight, and for me that's worked out pretty well. Other than that, you will need some fletchings. And so this is kind of the fun part about fletching your own arrows, is that you can experiment and really see what works best. So I have these AAE hybrid vanes that I like a lot. Essentially, I started with some different vanes and tried a couple and saw what grouped best out of my bow, and this is what I ended up with. And AAE is, again, a pretty well-respected company in my opinion, and I've had pretty good luck with them. And so for attaching the fletchings to your arrows, you need a glue. And so I generally gravitate towards just using the manufacturer's instructions and the manufacturer's products. You may pay a little bit more for them, but then if something goes wrong, you can reach out to them and they can maybe help you a little bit. But along with that, we have essentially the Max Adhesion Kit, I think is what AAE calls it. So we have these arrow wipes, we have this primer pen, and we have their glue. And those are really the essentials of what you need. I go a little bit above and beyond, and so I have a little arrow scale here. Again, just a cheap little thing. But I like to weigh my fletchings just to make sure that they're all the same, because there's some errors in the manufacturing process, and just to eliminate variables, I do that. And I like to know how much weight I'm shooting, total arrow grains. But beyond that, I actually wrap my arrows. And so I use these one stringer arrow wraps. This is a pretty neat little company. You go online to their website and you can custom design your own arrow wraps. They're really affordable, and I've had really good luck with these. They don't peel or come off, and overall I really like these guys. And so give them a look. And if you feel like fletching your own arrows and using arrow wraps, I think these are a great choice. So that's all you need. Not too much. Similar to reloading ammo, it's a little bit of a cost factor to get going, but once you have all of the equipment, it's pretty cheap to maintain the practice, and so not too much. The fletching jig is probably what's going to cost you the most, but there are some pretty affordable options out there, and really it's not too bad to get going, and it is just a lot of fun. To really, like I said, be invested in your gear and tinker and fine-tune your setup for the fall or for a 3D archery shoot or whatever you want to do. So the first step is to make sure that your arrow shaft is really quite clean. And so that's where these cleaning wipes come in. Really gets all of the grease or the manufacturing kind of solvents or whatever, or any oils from your fingers off of the arrow shaft, which may prevent good stickage from both the wrap or if you're gluing directly to the shaft, sticking of the vanes to your arrow shaft. And so you just take one of these wipes and just wipe down the back portion of the arrow shaft. And while that's drying, we're going to get set up to put our arrow wrap on. And so don't tell Olivia, my wife, but I have found a really good tool for putting on arrow wraps. And actually that is her sewing mat. I don't know. I like this because it has a good grid pattern, so you can make sure everything's all lined up and everything's straight. I think John Dudley makes like a specific thing for this that you can pay for, but I have access to this, right or wrong, and so this is what I use. And so we'll get lined up here. I'm going to switch around the camera so that we have a good view of this, and then we'll put the arrow wrap on. All right, so we have our arrow wraps here. I really like white so that I can see them, and I actually have them numbered so that I know what arrow is shooting in what way. So if there's something that is a little bit wonky, I can identify that pretty easily and get that out of my system. And so these are essentially just vinyl stickers that come on this little sheet. And so the first thing that we're gonna do is just peel this off. And so the length is determined by you, but the width is determined by your arrow, and they have a nice chart all set up on the website so that you can figure out what sort of width you need for your specific arrow and your specific setup. And so what I'm doing is I'm using this sewing mat to line up this sticker so that it is perfectly square with some of these lines. And so that acts as a guide so that I know that it's going on my arrow square, and I can line up the knock end all copacetic and make sure everything is lined up nice. And so sometimes it likes to stick to your fingers or whatever you use to straighten it, but that should be good there. And so from there, we have our arrow with the knock end, and we want to get this as close as possible to the wrap. And so you can see where the knock starts and where your arrow shaft, the carbon, starts. And so you want to get that, of course, right at the end of the carbon shaft. And all I do is once it's close, I just kind of slide it back onto the sticker. And now you can see that the sticker moved a little bit, so I know I'm making contact. And then from there, I just firmly push and roll back to me. And so we have a little bit coming up right there, so I'm just going to push that down as we go. Whoops. And so then now we just finish rolling our wrap onto the arrow. And so there we go. And you can see here we matched up pretty good, so we know that we were square and we're right at the end of the carbon. We don't see any black carbon right here, and so I think that's pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. Now, the other good thing about using arrow wraps is that you can take them off pretty easily, and so if you ruin a fletching by shooting into it or what have you, you can take these wraps off and just pitch them, and it's easier than just scraping your fletching off of your carbon arrow shaft. And so there we go. We have now wrapped our arrow, and that is ready for fletching. So now we are ready to fletch the arrow. So we have our arrow with our wrap installed, and so we put it down into the Bitzenburger here. There's a little slot that your nock fits into, and you just want to make sure that that's seated completely, because that has caused me some issues before. And today I'm going to do a 4-fletch fletching pattern. You can do 3 or 4 on this Bitzenburger, and that's just determined by this set screw, and there's a whole lot of videos out there that explain that a little bit more thoroughly. So what I have done previously is I have wiped the part of the fletching that is going to make contact with the shaft with my Max Clean wipe, and I've also wiped this wrapped portion once again because I touched it while wrapping it. And so again, these are just these Max Clean wipes just to make sure that everything makes contact like it should. And so now is where the Max Weld primer pen comes in. And so AE wants you to clean your arrow shaft, and using a little bit of paper towel, just push down and make sure that it's dispensing okay. And you kind of have to hurry a little bit with this because they want you to do this all, you know, kind of an expedited way. And so what I actually do, sorry, out of practice, is I put the fletching in the clamp first. And where you put it in the clamp can make a big difference. And again, this is something that you can kind of play with and determine. But I actually utilize this kind of third to last mark from the bottom, and that just determines how far it is from your nock point. And so you can see there's a little mark there, a little mark there, and a little mark there, and that's where we're going to start the vein. And so we have our Max Weld pen, and so I'm just going to give this a quick run of the Max Weld pen, and it wants you to put the glue on this within 30 seconds of doing the Max Weld pen. And so you don't need a lot of glue, and so that's, I think, one thing where a lot of this goes wrong is using too much glue. And so just kind of a little bead of glue, you know, kind of the whole way, and then I actually go back and kind of, without pushing any more glue out, just generally kind of spread it around to make sure that there's a lot of contact there. And so at that point, I already have this set up, and so I put it on these magnets here. And so before I even make contact with the fletching, or with the arrow, I make sure that it's seated properly against the base, and then all I do is push down into the arrow. And so looking from the side to make sure that there's good contact here, because with helical veins that can be a little bit of an issue. And so this glue generally sets up within about 10 seconds, they say. I like to give it a little bit longer just because I don't want to move things after they've you know, kind of already made contact. And so that's been about our time now. And so from here, I just make sure that I squeeze this first and then kind of pull back and move it onto the side of these magnets. And so at that point, I switch this over, and then I make sure to just give this a little bit of a touch just to make sure that it's making full contact. And so I don't know if you saw that, but part of the middle here was maybe lifted up just a hair. So we pushed a little bit more glue out, and I'm just holding it for another couple seconds just to make sure that's set up. And so now the important part is having some paper towel. And so you can just quick wipe away that excess glue because you don't need that or want that there. And then you are ready to move on to the next one. And so I'm kind of doing a little bit of a red, white, and blue pattern here for my arrow. And so we're going to add this red vein into our clamp. And so again, third from the bottom mark, we're going to quick give it a touch with our primer pen. And then from there, a little bit of glue. Again, just squeezing it up and then just kind of spreading it out just to make sure that we have it all covered. Good lighting is important here, and make sure that it's seated down fully after we spun it. Touch it to the bottom and then push it up against our arrow. And so waiting on this part seems to be a, a pain sometimes, but really it goes pretty quick. Now, if you were just doing a 3-fletch, again, you can knock out a dozen arrows in no time. With a 4-fletch, it takes a little bit longer. You have to be a little bit more careful with the helical just to make sure everything is sticking properly. But overall, it's really not too bad, and it's a pretty good way to spend an evening. So again, we're going to just pinch this back and move it to the side. Spin this over, and then just make sure that we're making full contact between the vane and the arrow. And that's, I would say, the main complaint of the Bitzenburger jig, is that it doesn't do helical super great. And this has been something that I know people like John Dudley, again, have spoken to this point too. You just have to be a little bit careful when you're doing a helical fletching, especially on these small diameter arrows like these Easton Axis. And so we have that down. Again, just going to wipe our glue, because we don't need any of that. And then now for the last two. So for the last one, I've now removed the clamp, and you can't really spin this because you're going to disrupt your other fletching there. So right now I actually just carefully remove the arrow from the fletching jig and just give this last fletching a push like I have the others, just to make sure that it's seated properly, and it is pretty good. And so with that, just a final wipe of some excess glue, and there is our fletched arrow. So pretty simple. You can see nice red, white, and blue pattern. And we're now done with this for the time being, but there is one more pretty important step just to cap this off. And so that is what's called tipping and tailing your vanes. And so some people use a different glue for this, but essentially what we're going to do is we're just going to add just a little dollop of glue at the very front of the vanes. Each one just a dollop, going a little bit of a haphazard pattern here. And then we're also going to do the same thing with the end of the vanes. And so this seems like a pretty low-key step, but I think it's really important for eliminating some of these vanes peeling up on the edges, especially the front. If you end up sticking it all the way through or into a block target or something that's been shot through a little bit, you just want to make sure that there's a little bit of extra glue on the front and the back just to prevent some sheer peeling of the vanes off of the shaft. And so although this glue is pretty much ready to go in a minute, it's not necessarily designed for this, and so these take a little bit longer to dry, and so I let them sit overnight for sure before shooting them if possible. Like I said, other people use different glues. I think, there's a Loctite glue that a lot of people like for this, but again, I'm just going to use the glue that I have, and that's going to be good enough. And it has served me pretty well in the past. And so that's pretty much it. You can see it's a pretty easy process, and it turns out really well. So that's that. And this is my full arrow setup for this upcoming fall. So we have an Easton Axis 300 spine arrow. We have our 4-fletch fletching that we did ourselves on top of the 1-stringer wrap. And I'm also shooting a blue lighted knock. These are nocturnals, which are what I've had the best luck with and I'm gonna actually be shooting both blue and white this fall. I have some issues with seeing red and green like a lot of folks, and so I can see the blue really well, but I've heard that white show up better than blue on camera. So I'm gonna try them both and see what we think. And then on the business end, of course, we have our brass insert in here, and I'm actually going to be using a Magnus Stinger broadhead. And so this is the kind of 4-blade, or the one with the little bleeder blades. And I think these are pretty well respected. I haven't used these in the past, but I kind of want to get into the fact, or the general trend very much lately seems to be going with a heavier setup. And now these are only 100 grains because that's what I've practiced and sighted in with these arrows. And with limited time, I haven't been able to mess around with some heavier weights up front. But moving towards this really swept back fixed blade broadhead pattern, which I think are going to be pretty good, or I hope that they're going to be pretty good, and I hope that we'll be able to put them to the test this fall. I also have some QAD Exodus broadheads that I'm going to be kind of going through and putting to the test as well. Those I bought last year and didn't really use a whole bunch just because of some tuning issues, but this is what I hope will be doing the most business this year. And so if we put it on our handy dandy little arrow scale, we can see what we got for a total weight, and we are right at 520 grains. And so with 520 grains, that's the business end of the archery tackle that I have for this year, and we'll hope to be putting it to the test. And so if you have any questions about this process or about my setup or anything, drop them in the comments below, and I'll be sure to get to them as soon as possible and be able to answer them to the best of my ability. And so with that, I appreciate you watching, and I'll be trying to put up some more content in the coming weeks and months and be a little bit more consistent. So again, I'm sorry. I am sorry. But we hope to be getting back into the woods and doing some fun things out in creation this fall. And so, thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.